Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Mark Call. We'll just give everybody another minute to jump on. I know there's other meetings ending, and give everybody a chance to get on before we get started. So we'll give it another minute. So I'm seeing in the chat box, are people not seeing the meeting?
I see it in the Zoom part.
Okay, but not the Pathable.
It's not in the Pathable.
It should be up and running now.
Okay, looks like we're getting a lot of people saying they can see it. Okay.
All right. I think, are we ready to get started?
I think so. Looks like we got a few people trickling in, but right now 148 participants. So I think we probably get started.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody that is part of the Invasive Species Working Group. We are your co-chairs, April Andahar, myself from the City of Monterey, and Mark Hall from NAVFAC, Mariana Squaw. So the first order of business for today is announcement of the new Invasive Species Working Group co-chair. So I had sent out a survey, and I did get a lot of bounce backs, and I did get a little bit of participation, but I only got 25 responses out of over 150 people in our working group. However, there was a strong preference on the working group voting. So I would like to announce that Doug Burkett will be the new working group co-chair. Mark Hall has served well for the last 2 years, and his term is ending. So a little round of applause. Welcome back, Doug, as he finishes his year in the pollinator group, or 2 years, I guess. Our next order of business is a little bit of housekeeping. So just remind everybody that if you have a question or comment, to please place them into Pathable, not into the Zoom. We will be monitoring the Zoom chat, but not everyone will be able to see that if they're not signed in through Zoom. We know a lot of people on their government computers cannot sign into the Zoom. And then also, again, on the email list, I did get a lot of bounce backs. So if you have not been receiving the emails from me or Mark, please go to the NMFWA website and re-sign up. And you might also want to include a personal email, just to make sure that your government computer is not bouncing it, because sometimes they block things that go out to a large number of people at a time. So our next order of business is new business for the next coming year. The topic of discussion that I would like to open up is if people are having issues with instituting a stray animal control plan. I know most of DoD has been required to come up with this plan on our installations. And then also how you're dealing with feral cats as an invasive species, if you're including those in your integrated pest management plans. The last thing I would like to bring up is I'd like to get a lot more engagement in this group. And there are several ways that we could do this. So there is, through the NMFWA website, there is a blog. However, that might not be the most convenient or accessible thing for everyone. So I would like to propose possibly a Facebook page where we could all share content and engage with each other on a more regular basis. And the last thing is we could also have a YouTube channel, and people could post videos there that we could all view if people feel that they have content they would like to share that wouldn't be appropriate to share just through an email because of restrictions. We definitely would like to get a lot more participation and engagement with this group, and suggestions on what you would like to see out of the group for education and training and other resources. So with that, I'm going to open up the floor to the questions that hopefully are coming in through the chat.
All right, so right now I got a from Bob Shulman. Speaking of feral cats, any suggestions on addressing community-supported free-ranging cat colonies outside the fence line? And then a note from Angela Glass, Navy and MCI can no longer reach YouTube channels. And then Grant Sizemore, I volunteer to help with stray cat issues. And then Catherine Seguin is, what metric would you measure participation by? So I can speak a little bit about Guam. So we're trying to, I know that some of the installations are trying to implement feral cat, feral dog control. The outside the fence issues are very difficult to deal with. Guam certainly has a large number of feral cats. There is trying to develop some active support of spaying and neutering programs, support outreach messaging as well. So those are some of the things that we're looking at on Guam here.
Yes, and for my installations, we have a bit of a larger issue because we have our housing area, which is privatized, which is not behind a fence, it's open. And that is where we have a really large problem with the stray animals and feral cats. We have started a new plan to engage through our intergovernmental service agreement for stray animal control, and they take those animals to the SPCA and then we pay for them because that is the way that our local SPCA, they won't take an animal unless the city that it comes from, and we're considered our own city, pays that fee.
So we have a lot of good information coming in from a lot of the members. There's a Association of Fish and Wildlife Agency feral cat working group. There's also a toolkit available from the NMFWA. So yeah, and so Norma asked the question, why would you support spay and neuter and release? I think from my personal experience, it's definitely been, there's a strong community out there that is very anti euthanizing cats. And so it does make things harder. And sometimes the command is a little shy of that process. But I think each location has their own responses and abilities to work with the community on that.
Yes, and the community response or community reaction is probably the biggest reason. It depends on where you are and where you can get support. Some SPCAs or humane societies will take the feral cats and other ones won't. It really depends on the volume, probably in the area that you live. But it's kind of a question that we don't know until we specifically ask. So is there an interest in maybe having a just a Zoom meeting sometime, maybe in a couple of months on how people are dealing with stray cats and the feral cats? Just kind of an informational sharing of ideas.
I would support that for sure. I know for Catherine Seguin and Tina Warner asked a very similar question about funding with dealing with feral cats. I know for Guam, we have a EPR POM for those. We also try to tie them to resource issues as opposed to just being a feral cat issue, which helps us with the funding. And that's how we approach it from this end. But pure feral cat issues, yes, they are harder to fund just if they're a nuisance in the neighborhood.
So for us, because the Army put out an op-ord that we have to have a stray animal control plan, and it's considered a section of the integrated pest management plan, I made the argument that O&M funds our pest management, so O&M should fund that service. And it is a safety issue potentially for other people's pets. So that's kind of how I got to the funding, because unfortunately my funding, VINC, is very boxed, and I can't spend it on that. And it's a hard argument to tie it to a natural resource unless you are really specifically managing a bird that can't escape from the feral cats.
I think it's sort of we'll see it in the presentation, but obviously, especially dogs, we'll talk more about cats, but they will be a vector for ticks. And so that's another issue that you could probably tie the feral animals to if you needed funding or have other issues.
Is there any other specific questions on the stray animal control?
Yeah, there's all sorts, but everybody's communicating reasonably well with them, with each other. I think it seems like it'd be a good topic to pursue throughout the year, get people engaged in.
Okay. So on that topic, what if we do that engagement meeting, what would be the best platform to do that? Would Zoom be preferable? For my government computer, I can't use Zoom, but on my personal computer, I can. Through my government computer, I have MS Teams, but I don't know that all agencies that are interested have MS Teams.
I believe Teams is disappearing this summer. I'm not sure what it's being replaced with. Or at least for the Navy, I know it is.
Mm. We just got it, so I'm pretty sure the Army's gonna keep it for a while. Yeah, so it sounds like maybe MS Teams would probably not be the best platform. If people are willing to do Zoom on a personal computer, we could certainly do that. And when you do a Zoom meeting similar to this, we're recording this meeting, we can live stream and record to a Facebook page if we have a Facebook page set up, so that people maybe not able to attend that meeting would be able to watch that recording later.
Right. It certainly seems like an issue we can follow up with afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there any additional topics that people would like to see addressed through this working group?
Yeah, hi, Doug here. Just,
Hi, Doug.
Hey, yeah, thanks for your confidence again. But the other applicant, Steve Manning, is just a outstanding individual, and I'll be relying on him for a lot of the outreach type materials. He's just an outstanding person. He runs his own invasive species annual conference, the Innovations in Invasive Species Control, that some of you sometimes attend. But with that said, I just wanted to gauge with the groups for technical sessions next year. If this is something you guys want to do, maybe we could set up a technical session with several speakers talking about some installations, early detection, rapid response programs that they have. I think there's a few out there enough that we can probably have a decent technical session. I was wondering if the group would be interested in something like that for next year, if NMFWA approves that particular technical session.
I'm certainly interested in it. I know it's something that, is best management practices. Unfortunately, in the government, we know that rapid frequently doesn't really mean rapid.
And certainly, I'll be querying. April and I will be querying this group for some volunteers to give some presentations if you want to showcase your particular program that you have in your installation, if that's something the group wants to do.
Yeah, so is there any additional topics coming in through the chat?
I do not see any specific topics. I think you've set the cat amongst the pigeons about feral cats, so I'm just.
Oh, pigeons are a whole nother topic, yes. If anybody has any success stories with pigeons, please share.
So from Norma Krebs, I hope I got our last name right. It's ants is a potential topic, I guess. Ants.
Ants is a good one. Yes.
Always a favorite.
Yes, I say that the entire Monterey Peninsula here is just one big anthill. We're just on one big anthill. Constant problem.
Yeah.
I actually had an interesting scenario at one of my sub installations where we have it's a Superfund site, so we have monitoring wells, which require people to go out to and check frequently, and they were getting attacked by ants. And I did not know that we had any fire ants in that area. So of course, I'm not an entomologist. So Doug is the entomologist. If you have insect questions, specifically, you can go to him. If I'm more the plant person, but unfortunately, I do have access to an entomologist, Dr. Bill Miller at Army Environmental Command, and I sent him pictures, and he said that it was not a fire ant, it was a harvester ant. However, they still bite people and it still hurts, and people were getting attacked. So I had to go out and kill off their colonies.
All right, so we've got a lot of other topics coming in. So there's the overarching program of biosecurity to deal with any potential invasive species or introductions. And obviously invasive plants, apple snails, not hawks, handling, see.
Oh, hey, Mark. Oh,
Yes.
yeah, this is Doug. Yeah, I was gonna, Tammy Conkle had made a comment. She wanted me to mention the stand-up of the new invasive species working group that falls under the OSD Conservation Committee. It's a subcommittee that Tammy Conkle and I are initially going to chair, and this is a OSD level invasive species group with a lot of the service members from both the pest management and the natural resources community, and also some operation folks in there, because invasive species is certainly one of those areas that covers all these different stovepipes, right? And it'll all be about policy and mission impacts, and there'll be a research section, and we'll be sure to send out any technical guidance or policy or items of interest that come out of that stand-up, that new invasive species group to this working group, if Tammy's okay with that. That's all I got for that, but stand by. It should be a pretty good group.
Hopefully you'll spend more time talking about other things than brown tree snakes. I think we talked that to death. There is a stream of good questions. Can't keep up with some of them, but there's zebra mussels is another issue potentially. Question from Darren Warner on updates on lanternflies. I don't know, Doug, I know you're pretty hot on that last year. I don't know if you have any updates on that.
Yeah, if you two co-chairs don't mind, I can give a quick update for spotted lanternfly.
Well, perhaps, or we could, yeah, we got to make sure we get to Dr. Allen's, make sure we got enough time. We have 20 minutes left in the meeting.
Oh yeah, we started I guess 45, right? So we got a few minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, we got a few minutes.
But yeah, Eddie, it's a long story, but just know that kind of the current leader for spotted lanternfly mitigation, I think, is going to be Dover Air Force Base, right? They're already working with USDA and making plans for disinfecting airplanes that are taking off from Dover and going to other spotted lanternfly free places. Yeah, it's an issue. More and more states, starting in Pennsylvania, Fort Indiantown Gap, and I think Melanie Fisher's got a couple of air guard bases there that are infested. We're worried about McGuire. Yeah, spotted lanternfly is going to be a super big deal here in the coming years, and I'll be glad to send out some materials on that to this particular working group if they're interested, because it's not something that's going to go away anytime soon, and there is going to be some quarantine restrictions, both incoming and outgoing from the state level, that DoD tends to follow along with. Good. That's all I got for now, because we don't have much time.
Right. So yeah, there's a lot of good topics in the chat, and please do reach out to April and Doug, either through email or the website, to get any topics to them and see if they can frame that up for the coming year.
All right, so I'm writing some of these down. I think we have access to these notes when we're done, but okay, try to get
Yes.
some speakers on ants, apple snails, invasive plants,
Spider fly,
spider
Silver
fly.
mussel,
biosecurity, I got that.
biosecurity would be,
Hey guys, this chat will stay up for about 6 months, so you can come back and see what they typed in.
Oh, super,
perfect.
thank you.
okay, thank you.
So the last topic that I'd like to bring up before we start the Q&A session for Dr. Allen is there is a slot actually for a recording secretary within the working group. And if we're going to start to have a lot more engagement, it's definitely something that we could probably use a little bit more assistance. So if anybody would like to nominate themselves, it is not a position that requires a vote. It's just a nomination and appointment by the co-chairs. So reach out to either Doug or myself if you are interested.
Let's
All
see
right.
any volunteers yet.
No volunteers yet. Big surprise. All right, we are going to start the Q&A for Dr. Allen's presentation.
All right. Eh,
All right, I can take it from here. Yeah, working group members and guests. Hopefully you've had a chance to view Dr. Allen's slide presentation, or if you haven't yet, please do here the next couple of days. It's just outstanding, and certainly is of great interest to me at the Pest Management Board in particular. But before I introduce Dr. Allen and open it up the floor for questions, I just wanted to put on my pest management hat here from the Pest Management Board, and just note that ticks and tick-borne diseases and the relationship with vector species, with invasive species, is getting worse and worse every year, right? Some recent data from the Armed Forces Health Surveillance Division there, shows that in 2018 there was over 1,800 cases of Lyme disease in our active duty, our reserve components, and their dependents, right? So over 1,800 species, and the total number of different tick diseases, whether it's rickettsiosis or relapsing fever or babesiosis or tularemia or whatever, that number goes up to over 2,800 cases of tick-borne diseases in this particular group. And tick-borne diseases, and especially Lyme disease, are just notoriously way underreported. Those numbers are probably tenfold from that, right? And this is just for the active duty and reserve and their dependents. We don't really have any good information about tick-borne disease incidents among natural resources members, or our contractors or our other users and allies of military training lands that might be exposed to ticks and tick-borne diseases. So this issue that Dr. Allen talked about in this presentation is just super important, and landscape level control measures for ticks and tick-borne diseases aren't easy to come by or cheap, but we need them, and the information that he has is just outstanding. And with that, I did want to turn over to Dr. Allen. Let's see if Dr. Allen, for those of you who didn't read his bio, I can get it to come up here. He's a professor of entomology at the University of Illinois, and I got a hourglass here waiting for it to come up. Yeah, he's with the School of Integrative Biology there, right? And his broad interests are in the ecology of infectious diseases, particularly diseases transmitted by the bite of affected arthropods, such as ticks and mosquitoes. And much of Brian's research focuses upon the consequences of human-mediated global change, such as climate change and human land use, on the risk of exposure to parasites and pathogens carried by wildlife. And with that said, it's certainly of importance to our natural resources community. And with that, I'm going to open up the floor to any questions from any of our members for Dr. Allen. I don't know if you have any open remarks. I'm going to have April share the screen if she hasn't already for kind of a summary slide of Dr. Allen's work.
Yeah, I'll just say thank you for the kind introduction, and I'm happy to answer any questions related to my presentation or any other questions people may have about the ecology of tick or mosquito-borne diseases. And thank you all for being here today.
Well, hey, I've got a question just to get things started. Really, I wonder if you could tell the group, you know, there's been some work done with, you know, Japanese barberry and Japanese honeysuckle for black-legged ticks and Lone Star ticks, and a little bit of work with stiltgrass, but was wondering if you had any plans or if you what your thoughts are for the potential of importance of some other invasive plant species that might serve as refugia for ticks and their hosts and tick-borne diseases that we should be cognizant of.
Yeah, I think the simple answer is that we've only scratched the surface of what are the potential ways that plant invasions can impact the ecology of tick and mosquito-borne diseases. And so through a number of what I would probably call case studies, we've demonstrated that there are different pathways by which this can happen. So some of these invasive plants create habitat for ticks or mosquitoes that likely increase their survival. And so the ticks or the mosquitoes live longer. Our research funded by CERDUP into Kogan grass in the southeast US has shown exactly that phenomenon, that ticks in Kogan grass live about twice as long as ticks out of Kogan grass. And that's probably by creating a more beneficial microclimate that prevent the ticks from desiccating in those kind of really hot southern climates where they are otherwise very exposed when they're off hosts. We've also seen indirect ways that invasive plants can impact ticks or mosquitoes through how their wildlife hosts respond to those invasions. And so I'd say we're in the early stages of understanding how plant invasions impact vector-borne disease risk. I think we've identified a number of pathways by which it can happen, but now what we really need is sort of a brute force approach where we look at relationships with quite a number of different invasive plants and try to understand which of these are the most common pathways. And that I think will be the most useful when it comes to making prescriptions. For example, being able to say invasive plant control will generally benefit a reduction in vector-borne disease risk. More studies will get us to that point where we'd be able to make those kind of broad conclusions that I think would be more useful to managers. I'll respond to Matt's question from the chat there, if that sounds good.
Great. Yeah, I'm timed out at the moment, so go ahead. If you can read the chat questions, please go ahead and answer them, because I can't see them at the moment.
Yeah, so Matt, I did some of my PhD research on Linicera macchiae and how it impacts risk of tick-borne disease transmitted by Lone Star ticks in the south central US. So this is invasive bush honeysuckle. And we tested a couple different pathways, one of which was this sort of direct effect on tick survival, and we saw no direct effect. So ticks in Linicera macchiae invaded stands did not have any difference in their survival compared to ticks in uninvaded habitats. And so that's a great example of this indirect pathway, because we did see a response on the part of the hosts, specifically white-tailed deer, which are a key host for Lone Star ticks. And we found that white-tailed deer were more active in invaded patches. They spent more time there. I noticed a pattern where the females would tend to stow their fawns in those habitats. And so we think it's because deer are spending more time in Lonicera invaded patches that we're seeing an increase in the abundance of Lone Star ticks in Lonicera habitat, and they have higher infection rates for a number of pathogens that cause disease in humans, because deer are also key reservoir hosts for some of those pathogens transmitted by the Lone Star tick. So Lonicera macchiae is a great example of that indirect pathway where it's a host response to the invasive plant that's mediating the increase in tick-borne disease risk. David, that's an interesting question. If you're referring to the density of the invasives, no, I don't think most studies have looked at that yet. And so generally, what a lot of us who are working on this question do is we look for really dramatic differences between invaded stands and uninvaded stands. A lot of these invasives that we're working on to begin with generally form monocultures. And so you're comparing two extremes, a monoculture of invasive to areas where those invasives are completely absent. I think it'd be more interesting to start to look across those sort of gradients in the density of the invasives and ask, are there critical thresholds? I think, again, that would be really useful to managers, because it might be that you don't have to eradicate an invasive completely to reduce its effect on tick-borne disease risk, but maybe you just need to knock it down below a certain density level. So I hope to be able to get back to you on that at some point in the future. And Paul, thanks for asking about prescribed burning. That's actually the other major aspect of our CERDUP funded research. So the presentation I prepared for this meeting focused on the impact of invasive plants, but the second major aspect of our research is looking at prescribed fire and how that influences ticks. There have been a number of studies now, and most studies show that more frequent and more recent fire reduces tick abundance. And that's consistent with our research in the Southeast US, looking in longleaf pine ecosystems. We find that more frequent and more recent fire is associated with lower abundance of Lone Star ticks. And so that appears to be an additional benefit of prescribed fire management, is that there's a reduction in ticks. And that's been shown for a number of different tick species and a number of different ecosystems. Depending on fire intensity, you can get some amount of tick survival. So fire intensity has been shown in some studies to be a key factor in sort of how much tick reduction you get from prescribed fire. So that's one element to this. Again, there are also direct and indirect effects. So there are direct effects of fire on ticks, and then there are indirect effects of fire on ticks mediated through other changes in the habitat. For our work in the Southeast US, we're actually, again, finding that these indirect pathways are more important, that the effects of prescribed fire on litter cover and canopy cover seem to be the mechanisms by which fire reduces tick abundance, more so than the direct destruction of ticks by fire. Looking at April's question about Kogan grass and have there been any studies on large wildlife survivability of ticks? Yeah, it's actually one of the least well-studied questions, is how do ticks impact wildlife health and tick-borne diseases impact wildlife health? In some completely unrelated projects I have working in East Africa, we've been looking at this effect of tick pathogens on wildlife, and it probably plays a huge role in wildlife health. But due to some of the challenges associated with working directly on wildlife, it's really an understudied question. So I can only point to a few examples of where people have been even able to test that question of the effects of ticks on wildlife. But they probably have a significant factor in wildlife health. I see Aaron has a question about host diversity, prevalence of ticks. Yeah, the dilution effect. Yeah, I'm very interested in this hypothesis. I have done some work on it in the past. It's not something I'm currently focusing on with our work in the Southeast US, in part because I think it's not a system where host diversity will likely play as big a role. So for the Lone Star tick, our research suggests that white-tailed deer are both a critical host for the ticks. So perhaps a majority of Lone Star ticks feed on white-tailed deer, and they're a key reservoir for the pathogen. And so in the case of Lone Star tick-associated diseases, it looks like essentially the abundance of white-tailed deer is overarching the most important sort of wildlife factor in determining tick-borne disease risk. But you're absolutely right. For Lyme disease, there's now a lot of evidence that host diversity plays a role. And when host diversity is lost, tick-borne disease risk increases. That's been shown for Lyme disease. It's been shown for West Nile virus. Getting out of vector-borne diseases, there's good evidence that that occurs with hantavirus as well. So there probably are a number of different zoonotic diseases for which host diversity is a major driver of disease risk. And it's one of the most interesting questions in disease ecology. So I'm glad you asked about it. I find it a fascinating topic. And we have a question about the prevalence of Lyme disease in the West versus the South and the East. Yeah, so part of it has to do with the distribution of ticks that can transmit Lyme disease. So there's 2 species of ticks that are the primary vectors of Lyme disease in the US. The black-legged tick in the Eastern and Midwestern US, and the Western black-legged tick in the Western US. And where those ticks occur, you can get transmission of Lyme disease to humans. But the big hot spots are the Northeast and the Midwest. That's just where we see the most cases of Lyme disease. That's probably a combination of the right environmental conditions for the transmission of Lyme disease and high human density. So you get a lot of people where there's a lot of disease risk. There certainly is Lyme disease in the West, but the Western black-legged tick doesn't tend to achieve the same level of abundance as its Eastern counterpart. And so that might be one reason why there's less Lyme disease in the West. Another actually relates to the dilution effect hypothesis that Aaron just mentioned. And there's some really interesting work from the Western US that indicates that the Western black-legged tick feeding on wildlife that are not good reservoirs for the Lyme pathogen, such as Western fence lizards, dilutes the transmission of Lyme disease. And so ticks in the black-legged tick in the West is likely feeding on hosts that block the transmission of the Lyme pathogen, such as lizards. Something similar is likely occurring in the Southeast as well, which is probably why there's less Lyme disease in the Southeast US.
So this is a question for Doug, and just as a note, we have technically a minute left, but we have 10-minute overrun for the session. But there's more question for Doug, but related to your research. Doug, is there a noticeable trend within the disease prevalence within, training areas for service personnel and stuff with the increases or this data? What's the impact of the mission and personnel?
Well, hopefully you can hear me. I've been having some technical problems for staying logged in, and hopefully if I'm not talking to myself, but just some of that information from the Armed Forces Health Surveillance Center about tick-borne diseases on military installation. I think internally they might have it broken down by installation, but I don't think they share that. And I would be glad to share that recent paper that was published in their MWR publication that came out in February that might be of interest to the group. I'll make a note to forward that to our members.
Great. Okay. Dan, statement of fact from Dan Leavitt: lizards are more awesome than rodents. Depends what side of the fence you're on, I think. Yeah. Not as good as plants.
All right.
Uh,
So I'd like to thank Dr. Allen for his presentation and addressing your questions. If you do have any additional questions, you still have a few minutes to put them in the chat, and we can probably compile them and get them to him. I'd like to thank everyone for attending the meeting and good participation, and we look forward to seeing you a lot more in the future.
Thank you, everybody. Please feel free to follow up with me if you have any additional questions.
Great. Yes.
Thank you,
for the
Brian.
presentation. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.